Namaskar dosto. Today we have a special guest. He's from USA, Mr. Sriram, and he's an economist. He's written a lot of books. And the good thing about him is very humble. And humble is to that extent that even Nirmala Sitaramanji, I think so, agrees with his ideas of Dharma economics. Modi ji has also given him appreciation for the book he has written. And what this book is all about is about our culture, our dharma, and how in the ancient times we were a developed country, economy, or you can say a civilization. So today's talk is all about, like, today we see Mahakumbh. What is Mahakumbh? Why it was there? Why it was created? Yes, there is a cosmic energy time. That is why all these congregations happen. But there is something deeper into this thing also. So we'll talk about a lot of things. What is the geopolitical implications of the Mahakumbh and all the other things which are associated with Bharat, with Sanatan, with all our ancient civilization, techniques which were employed. And now, what is the government doing at the moment? Is it still in line with our ancient times, or is it something which needs to be changed to bring the same dharma economics back into our civilization? So, Shri Ramji, thank you so much for joining today.
Namaste. It's great to be part of your show, and I look forward to talking to you about my research and my books, and of course the Mahakumbh as well.
So, Shri Ramji, now like we did talk just before the show also. I know that you've written a lot of books on the dharma economics. What do you think that right now what is happening in India? Like we see Mahakumbh, it's like 450 million people coming for one program, for a few days, coming together, forgetting of each and everything, their religion, their caste, their everything, forgetting, coming together for this one dip in such a cold weather. What does it tell you about the culture, also about the economic benefits of the whole thing?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, the Mahakumbh is probably the most significant Indic event probably in our lifetimes because of the fact that it's happening for the first time in 144 years. Of course, there are various kumbhs which happen every 3-4 years, but this is special because you're having almost 400 million people. Just to give you some context, 400 million people means it is more than the population of the United States, and 400 million people are arriving at Prayagraj, which is not even a tier one city, which means in Bharat, which means imagine the scale of infrastructure, the scale of cooperation between the state and central governments, scale of governance and planning that has to go behind such a massive event. So I think before we get into all this, we need to just sit back and absorb the effect of such a massive gathering. Of course, it's primarily a spiritual exercise, and people wait for years to get engulfed in the entire spiritual realm of things, and the spiritual experience that the Mahakumbh provides. And sadhus wait for years to be part of this. So it's a spiritual spectacle, no doubt, but there's a lot of socio-economics behind it, and I think that's an important observation as well, which we need to make, we need to understand. Just to give you some context, the budget for the Mahakumbh is about 7,000 crores. About 5,000 crores come from the UP government. About 2,000 crores, 2,100 crores come from from a grant from the central government. And this provides the platform for infrastructure, for all the tents, for all the tourism infrastructure that people make, that people have done, the food, and the entire sort of what I call the Dharmic ecosystem, which is created at Prayagraj for this 45-day event, right? And this provides a lot of some examples I would provide in terms of what is being done. There's a 40 square kilometer venue which has been created for these pilgrims, which is much more than the earlier Mahakumbh in 2013. Uh, um, and then the 1.5 lakh toilets have been created, 10,000 changing rooms for pilgrims have been created, 7,500 buses have been arranged, at least 3,000 special trains have been arranged. Uh, 400 crores has been allocated for the energy infrastructure, the renewable energy infrastructure, the recycling that comes out of all this. About 4,400 crores, 400 crores have been allocated for that. And then you have the entire technological perspective this time around, right? You have AI technology, you have drones, you have startups, entrepreneurial startups who are involved in these technological pursuits, who are also using what I call the economies of scale. Imagine from a business standpoint, right? At one place, you're having 400 million people. Can you get a bigger sort of potential for a business or for a policymaker to exhibit? So it's almost like 100 times the audience that you have, or more than that, for example, right? So it's a huge economic opportunity because of all these things. And the estimates are fascinating, right? One of the estimates that came from CII is that around 10 lakh jobs are being created during this event, which is again much more than the previous time. But there's a significant number. More than that, there's estimates which also talk about 2.5 lakh crores in terms of revenue generation, both direct economics as well as the indirect as well from the event. Again, to give you some context, the GDP, the state GDP of Uttar Pradesh for 2023-2024 was 25.8 lakh crores. And we are talking about 2.5 lakh crores in terms of revenue estimates, right? Even if these estimates, this is about 10% of GDP, mind you, 10% of the state GDP for the year could be, gained from this. Okay, let's assume that these estimates are very high. Okay, even if it's 5%, it is still a significant number, right? Because within a 45-day period, it provides a lot of support, infrastructure support, and one is this direct economies of scale I'm talking about, right? Which is all these numbers that I provided, which is happening because the event is happening. Then there is what I call indirect economies of scale, which means what happens to all the infrastructure that's been created, right? Because it's not like they're going to disappear. After the Kumbh ends, it is going to benefit the people of Prayagraj, it's going to benefit the people of Uttar Pradesh, it's going to benefit the various communities in Uttar Pradesh, because these infrastructure, especially the tourism infrastructure, the roads that have been developed, the airport, maintenance that has been developed, for example, the food infrastructure that's been developed, the restaurants and all these things, the hotels, all of them are going to remain after this, right? The tents might go, but there's a lot of indirect infrastructure which also helps, which is useful for the local community, right? So this is what I call indirect economies of scale, which are also developed because of this. So these are two major points, and one important point again is what we need to note is that, look, no matter when you conduct this event, there are still millions of people going to go for the event, plan for the event, do the necessary expenditures, discretionary spending for this event, and then get themselves involved in the spiritual realm. In that sense, it's highly what we call in economics inelastic demand, which means, irrespective of how the macro environment changes, whether we grow at 10% or if the interest rate is at, say, 10%, RBI's interest rate, or whether it's at 5%, you would still see large sections of people going to these places. Of course, the amount of expenditure that they make might reduce a bit, but by and large, this is inelastic by itself. And I think that's a huge business opportunity, right? Because if you're if this way of life can produce this economies of scale, besides the socio the spiritual angle, there is a potential for a lot of economic opportunity. And lastly, from a political economy standpoint, right? Especially in a very chaotic democracy like India, like Bharat, chaotic in the sense, of course, there are a billion people, so I would say benevolent chaos. But the fact that to push the bureaucracy and the state to execute things in a time bound manner, because you need to execute policies for this 45-day period. There is no ifs and buts. You have to do it within this 45-day period, and you have to plan for this entire exercise. So it really pushes the entire political economic system, the bureaucratic system, to produce results because the entire world is watching, right? So it also enhances the efficiency of the system to produce more effective outcomes when it is time bound and when it is focused on these particular events. So I think it has a substantial. What I'm trying to say is there is a dharmic way of life which has been happening for thousands of years, and it is of course primarily spiritual, and it provides the pathway, the purusharthas as we call it. But there's also an artha part of it. There's also an economic element of it, which I think that we should be cognizant, not just cognizant about, but if we are smart enough, if we can align public policy towards these some of these natural ways of life, it probably makes public policy far more effective. So yeah, this is how I view the economics of the Mahakumbh.
Shriramji, I've seen the economics of Mahakam. You're an economist. I am a finance and economist also. So we understand numbers. So for people to understand, is like our ancient people, they knew that dharma is what is going to drive the economics. We used to have temple economics before. So temple was a center point of the economic activities, and that is exactly that's why we had all these Shakti peeths. We had these, the major temples, Ayodhya ji, and then we had Kashi, we had Mathura. So these are center points where people used to come every year, every month, and then we have those 1 year, something happening once in a year, something happening once in 12 years, or something happening once in 144 years. So all these things was driving the economy. It's like IPL. In 50 days they earn so much money, which other the whole team is toiling around whole year. The economics of 45 days of IPL is much higher than the whole year working. Same is with Mahakumbh or all these activities. Now we have seen the way the government is working now, and I also see, I'm sitting in China. China is talking about the Mahakumbh happening in India. The 400 people going for a dip into Ganges. They like, they think this is Ganges only, but they don't understand what is Triveni. But they are baffled that how come in such a cold weather all these people are going. So they understand there is something called Astha, but they are also talking about the economics. I've seen that most of the Chinese companies are also going there. They're advertising their products. They can see the opportunity that all these people coming together and they are going to be their future customers. Do you think there's a geopolitical angle also? The whole world is watching us. They feel that this is a case study we should be studying. I found that Harvard, LSE, all these big university people, they are sitting there trying to study how this all works. You think there's some bigger angle to this also for our positioning in the world?
100%, right? Because look, not just because why it fascinates people is we are having a congregation of such a large section of people without without any external entity. I mean, no one is telling them to go to these places, right? No one is,
Yes.
no particular entity is marketing the Mahakumbh, right? The Mahakumbh happens no matter who is in political power, which no matter what the you know dynamic of politics is, right? I mean, just to give you some context, right? The idea of a nation state itself is 150 years old or 200 years old. Okay, so the the entire concept, a lot of the concepts of modern Bharat have transformed, have changed through the years, but nothing shifts the the power of these ideas, and the fact that they're coming together spontaneously to attend this event. So it's naturally a fascinating thing, and of course it's a it comes. I mean, since you speak about China, I the Chinese are very much sympathetic towards this because a lot of their sort of economic, they're left out of poverty. For example, even in modern China, there's a lot of literature that talks about how they cater to how they have a decentralized structure which caters to local cultural norms and narratives in the villages, and then they tweak policy to suit these norms and narratives and then expand the economies of scale. So what I'm trying to say is, even though modern China is considered to be a very different beast, but if you look at their approach to economic activities, it has a lot of these nuances. So in a very complex, large country, they understand the challenges that are there in a complex, diverse country, and that's why it also probably fascinates them as well. So there's indeed a geopolitical angle, and this is not just now. I mean, the Kumbh is a manifestation of this dharmic way of life in such a large scale, right? But if you look at, say, thousands of years back, the Cholas, for example, the southern kingdoms, you talked about the temple-based economies. I call this the dharmic ecosystem in my books. The Cholas, for example, had a lot of communication with the Chinese. There are Chinese embassy notes which are there written from the Cholas because maritime trade was central to ancient Bharat's prosperity, and a lot of traders had shrinis, which are corporate guilds, in multiple locations, including in Champa in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in China. So maritime trade and commerce, even in ancient Bharat, was this was the central hub of the world, so as to say. So there is a geopolitical angle not just now, but there's a geopolitical angle because it also provides a huge opportunity for other countries to see our diversity, how our inclusive society works, and how the advent of technology and all these things are also coming into play. So there is no what I'm trying to say is modernity is blending into tradition. It's supplementing tradition. It is not bypassing tradition. So that confluence again fascinates people. But yeah, of course, we'll discuss more about my works later. But yeah, there is indeed a geopolitical angle, as you say.
So, like we've seen the geopolitical angle, we've seen the economic angles. But there's another angle which I would like to discuss with you. Is that dharmic economics? We see that ancient times also we had the dharmic economics always driving us, and we were a prosperous country as or a civilization always because of our dharmic principles. Now, from a country point of view, we can understand that. But is it possible that we can even have this dharmic economics, rooted down to our individual lives or in corporations, in companies, and then it can take us forward now also in the modern times?
See, definitely. I mean, my view is that there is definitely a case to understand this. Of course, modern economic financial systems are very complex. They are they are very what I can call it, data driven, technology driven. And there's a lot of complexity in modern financial architecture, no doubt about it, right? Of course, but eventually, at the base, at the basic level, individuals have to make economic choices. So, for example, Sumeet, you're sitting in China, you want to buy a laptop, you have to sit at home, go to whichever platform, and then make that choice of buying a particular product, right? When you're making that choice, for you and me, for example, what our upbringing, our cultural values, and our sort of cultural ethos help us to make a choice, right? It might not be like it might be 10% in some cases. In some cases, it might be 50%. Say, for example, you're buying a house. You might want to look at Vastu, for example, right? You might want to look at, other factors, for example, right? So what I'm trying to say is there is an element of norms and narratives, cultural norms and narratives at the individual level when we're making economic decisions. Even today, same thing thousands of years back, you might buy things like, say, gold, or you might buy things like, a boat or something like that. Today, you're buying a laptop, right? But the thought process behind making an economic decision, economic choice, is driven by your upbringing and your cultural ethos, right? But this is at the individual level. Let's take at the corporate level, right? If you take, say, the top 15, 20 businesses in India today, in Bharat today, most of them are family driven businesses. They might be publicly listed, yes, but they have a family structure that runs these businesses, right? So it could be, whether it's the Ambanis or the Adanis, or even smaller firms. Most of them are driven by familial values, familial cultural ethos, which drives their governance of these structures. Of course, they have modern principles. They use, say, MBA textbooks to to create their architecture of their businesses and all these things. But eventually, when they make decisions, they're all driven by a certain factor, by their cultural prism, right? So, what is this cultural prism, right? In my view, what I'm arguing is that this is this dharmic way of life which has come through these thousands of years in various forms, various iterations, and it plays a role in these choices that people make, and especially largely in Bharat because of the fact there's a huge informal sector which is driven by a lot of the smaller firms, so all the kirana shops, all the local shops which provide the most employment in the country, and most of them are driven by things like trust, things like, for example, if say there is a, for example, a small firm goes bust, right? He's going through bankruptcy. Right now, we have, say, the IBC, the bankruptcy code for bigger firms, right, which can go and have resolution and all these. But say the small kirana shop down your street in Mumbai or wherever. So first thing, what will they do is they'll go to their entire family to try to get some money, get some financing, some friends, some social networks to do it. If those things don't happen, then they end up going to the bank, or they going to end up going to a local lender who will charge them, much higher than what the banks charge. Now, because of digitalization, all these things, banks also have some credit history, based on which they can give loans. But what I'm trying to say is the entire informal sector works on these networks based on trust, familial networks, based on responsibility and things like that. And all of this, again, pegs back to this dharmic way of life. So what I'm trying to say is it is there in our day-to-day lives. I'm just trying to highlight that in a systematic, coherent sort of financial, economic architecture lingo, so that a policymaker, a bureaucrat who's sitting, understands this and uses it for policy. Because eventually, right, the more you recognize all this, the more policy making becomes more effective. I'll give you another small example, right? So the sovereign gold scheme. Have you heard of you'd have heard of the sovereign gold scheme, which the RBI had floated some time back in 2015. In very, very simple terms, you have a tranche of gold at home. Most of our, especially women, have gold. You can take that gold, give it to the RBI. After 3 years, basically it's a bond. After 3 years, after maturity, you get back a new tranche of gold, uh, which covers the entire, additional amount as well, right? Initially, when they did this, and they did a survey after, it wasn't too successful. So they did a survey after, to understand why it was not successful. The top reasons that women, especially women, gave for it to be not successful is they wanted the same goal back. That is the goal that they deposited. They wanted the same goal back, and the rest of it, they said, "Okay, you give me a new tranche of gold, right? Whatever that additional interest that is accrued, you can give me a new this thing, or you can give me cash or whatever. They're not bothered." But the gold as an instrument is a sentimental value for Bharatiya women, by and large, right? Because it came through their familial connections, or it will come through their in-laws, or whatever it is, or their parents, or whatever it is. So its role in an economic, choice matrix is that it's seen as, from a Western lingo, it's seen as a non-productive asset, right? From a Bharatiya perspective, it is seen much more than that. There's a value given to this instrument, much more than pure financial value. So what I'm trying to say, this is an example. So they tweak the policy so that there are ways in which you can get the same goal back, and the rest of the amount can be distributed. So what I'm trying to say is this is an example when policymakers are aligned, or they understand this way of life, whatever they want to achieve in terms of outcomes can be made far more effective if they're already aligned to this. Because look, people are not going to change. This is, like the Mahakumbh. No matter what happens, as long as the sun rises in the east and sets on the west, you will have this many million people coming and being part of this, right? It's us. We have to. I mean, the policymakers and the elite that has to understand this and align it to this way of life to make things more effective. So what I'm trying to say is this: this dharmic way of life is there for all of us to see in practical application in today's Bharat. But I think so. It's important for us to acknowledge it and then see how, and it can play a very complementary role. See, it's very difficult to systematically change anything uh, in general. I think systems are there, some of them for their own benefit. I'm not trying to say that everything from the past is sacrosanct. Obviously, there are some issues in the past which we don't want to bring it up today.
Hmm.
But there are these lessons, eternal lessons that we can use to enhance effectiveness of policy. If policy making is 80% effective, make that 95% by aligning to this way of life, understanding and acknowledging it. And there's a lot of literature in the West, by the way. George Akelroff, who is, in fact, the husband of Janet Yellen, he won the Nobel Prize in 2001 in economics for asymmetric information. But his research on he's done a lot of research on identity economics, which is basically the role of identities in economic decisions in the West itself, where this is, I wouldn't say not present, but compared to Bharat, it's to a lesser extent. So he's done a lot of work, and so a lot of scholars in the West have done work on norms and narratives and its impact on economics. And in Bharat, it's central to our functioning. So it's important to understand this and appreciate this more.
So, Shriramji, first of all, we've been talking about how Mahakumbh is just a testimonial to our ancient Dharma economics, how we were prosperous. Now, the West has a flawed system of finance and economics. We've seen that. We always see some kind of a crisis coming up. But in Bharat, we see that even COVID came, COVID went, nothing much happened. Yes, little bit of dent was there, but we could come out of it, because of some kind of policies which were, some, we can say, ancient kind of policies followed by the government of India. We are still the rising, most fastest rising large economy of the world. Now, West keeps on lecturing us, especially people coming from big universities. They feel that they know all. Every culture they know how economics runs. And Modi ji being one, guy who doesn't understand economics, they feel so. And they start keep lecturing us. You feel after seeing the success of our handling of the crisis in a systematic way, the way we are handling now Mahakumbh, the congregation of 400 million people coming, everything being managed automatically without any social media marketing being done, or anything, all these terms which the West uses. You think they'll go back and change their economic systems and start learning what our dharma economics is all about?
Yeah, look, there are two issues here, right? I mean, just to be clear, one issue is what you call about in general, I would say pontification of the West, right? That there are certain Western structures in play, driven by the Anglo-Saxon world, and that's how these systems have evolved over a period of time, right? But this is, I'm not defending their side, but what I'm trying to say is these people, their civilization is about 300, 400 years, right? At best. So their understanding of the world is from a scratch. I mean, it's from a place where it is still an evolving understanding of the world, of what they think represents, the values of the world and things like that, right? And because of the fact that they are financially a superpower at a particular moment, their understanding is that these things are the ones that led for them for their prosperity. But on the other hand, there are events like the 2008 financial crisis, for example, where they course correct. I mean, a lot of what you call as neoliberal policies, which were done in early 1990s and 2000s, post the financial crisis, have gone the other side because they realize some of these issues that they have, and then they course correct with some of them. So I think so that is one part of it, the general sort of pontification that you're talking about. The second is what are we doing, right? So I think, see, definitely in the last 10 years, I think there are a lot of areas that we have done significantly better, especially on digitization. the entire sort of digital architecture, the India stack, the startup ecosystem, the entire UPI infrastructure, financial inclusion. I mean, these are all areas where not only we are leading in some sense the world, but we are also providing solutions to the world. I think more and more people are recognizing it, right? Of course, if there are certain Indians who are abroad who are stuck with a certain worldview, especially those above 50, um, that is, that is something which you cannot change. Even if you make Bharat a superpower today, they'll still have something to whine about, right? But if you take by and large the objective middle ground people, not just in Bharat, even outside, I think many people are acknowledging that a lot of these structural changes are benefiting the country. And as an extension, because we have a billion people, it's benefiting the world as well, right? So the approaches to some of these things, organizational ability and new ideas, how in these cultural norms are driving some of these outcomes. I think people are starting to understand that this is how countries work, especially in Asia. Because see, the Chinese experiment or the Chinese development is again a huge enigma to the West, right? Because it's they themselves are trying to figure out how the Chinese have evolved, right? Have reduced poverty at such a rapid rate, despite all their structural, despite being a communist country and things like that, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I think uh, uh, anyone who's objectively in the West, who wants to see India through an objective lens, will end up appreciating or at least acknowledging some of these progress that is made. And of course, there's so much more progress we have to make, right? We are still, our per capita incomes need to grow at a rapid rate for us to even be an upper middle income country, right? So what I'm trying to say is there's a long way to go, but over the last 10 years, if you really notice, I think there's been a structural shift in how the world views Bharat. Uh, you know, the world used to view Bharat as a snake charming, poor country decades back. Today, it is seen as an aspirational society which is at the forefront of certain technological developments, a huge young population, more and more people see it as a society which is who's an aspiring superpower. And this is very important, right? When you're an aspiring superpower, that is when what you stand for gains global traction, because you're seen to be doing the right things because you're moving up the economic ladder. So that's why, say, for example, if an international yoga day was projected, say, 30 years back, right, in the 1980s, for example, right, the question would be, you're still so poor. So what's the point of doing yoga, right? But today, an international yoga day is aligned to the success of Bharat over this period of time, and the prospective success of Bharat as a superpower. So what I'm trying to say is there's a huge relevance to a lot of what we stand for as we become the third biggest, largest country, in the world. And I think this is bound to increase, and this will definitely expand exponentially some of these ideas that we stand for, which are, you see, in some cases it's very unique to our lifestyles, right? For example, the entire dharmic lifestyle is very unique to us. So what I'm trying to say is that they one has to be cognizant of all the best practices that we have in the West. The Western system has its own benefits, the free markets, free enterprise, and the amount of commerce that has evolved has enormously changed the world, right? So we have to bring all the positive elements of this, but also understand that, look, there are certain cultural moorings which are there at the base of our existence. So how do we customize this to our strengths and make it our strength? I think that's where the entire Atmanirbharta and conceptually also, I think, is being panned out, and I think that's how we need to approach this.
So, Shriram, one thing very interesting you've said is the last 10 years. You mentioned it three times when you were speaking. That last 10 years this has happened, last 10 years this has happened, and we are moving ahead. We are aspirational. We are looking at ourselves as the next global power or, superpower, whatever you call it. You did not mention before that. So, we understand that a lot of work which has happened in the last 10 years. Now, coming back to this question, this is the last question. Do you feel that the policies of the government of India are in line to become a global superpower, and a developed country also, which Modi ji says that by 2047 we aspire to become a developed country where the per capita income of everybody, including the farmers, the poor people, everybody increases and we get that status. Now there are a lot of policy changes which have happened. They've implemented a lot of things, and it is being appreciated all over the world. I can see that. But do you feel there are a lot of other policies also which need to be addressed by the government of India now, so which are in line with our dharma economics, which can take us forward quickly?
See, what I meant is, look, ever since the 1990 economic reforms happened, Bharat has been in a upward trajectory, right? We've been growing on an average of 7 to 8, 7.5% over these decades. So definitely, irrespective of who was in power, there has been progress, right? What we're talking about is, even during the early phases of from 2005 to 2009, there has been cumulative progress over a period of time, right? Over various governments, right? And policymakers have executed a lot of these reforms in a complex democracy like Bharat to push this, to gradually, take this forward, right? But what I'm trying to say is post 20. One of the reasons why I mentioned post 2014 is you also have a leadership, a mandate which is huge, right? A mandate which is beyond the coalition politics of the past era, which provide a lot of structural constraints. There are many parties, there are a lot of lot of political challenges were there, and here we have a leader who's world renowned, who's seen as a global sort of thinker and global. The world looks up to his leadership on a lot of these issues, and that makes also a big difference, because you're having political stability, and that political stability is reflected by a lot of these foundational policies. Another important thing is, see, in the entire digital ecosystem, the entire India stack, and which is of course started. The Aadhaar project was started in the UPA term, but the real expansion of the India stack is seen as and the UPI India stack is seen as something that is unique to Bharat, and seen Bharat is seen as a world beater. Very rarely you see that you were a world beater in something, right? In the past, right? For example, I mean, we all grew up in the 1990s. I mean, Sachin Tendulkar was demigod, right? When Sachin used to play, thousands of houses in Bharat used to be praying. But there's a reason for it, right? Because there's a dearth of global talent. Sachin Tendulkar was one of the few guys who was a world beater in what he was doing. He was an Indian who was on the world stage, who's undisputed, cricketer, right? Whereas today, if you notice, we are there are various world beaters. There's a world chess champion who's 18 years old. There is plethora of chess. For example, since I used to be a chess player, who are all in up there in the top. So what I'm trying to say is we have moved to a stage where, as a society, as a government, as governance, and where we are producing things that are not just innovative, but they are leading the world on some issues, right? So I think that is the difference. What I'm trying to say. I mean, one is the entire political leadership, the stability, and all that. But broader, picture is post 1990. We have evolved to a stage where large sections of our upper richer people, upper middle income people have all gone up the income scale, right? So our worldview has changed. Our aspirations have changed. We are not content with very basic things. We want better things. We want to be an aspirational society. So I think it's the combination of these factors, and of course there are many things we need to do. Like I mentioned, right? We still have large sections of people who are poor in Bharat. So how do we, um, uh, you know, how do we address some of these issues? I mean, you take our cities. Most of our cities are so clubbered. I mean, it's very difficult to live in a major city in Bharat because much of our urbanization has gone all the way till, for example, in Chennai, most of the city goes all the way to Mahabalipuram, which is a which is and Kanchipuram on the other side. So what I'm trying to say is the cities have expanded so much and they're going into tier one areas. So we need to create what tier two, tier three cities, which are economies of scale, which can,
Hmm.
because of the fact that there is a lot of these airports which have been developed. Today, you could take a flight from, say, Srirangam, which is a temple town near Tiruchi in Tamil Nadu, to Delhi twice a day, right? A direct flight. So a lot of this infrastructure has been set up. But what we need is decentralized cities and tier two, tier three cities, which can expand on economies of scale. And I think that's where the entire Dharmic ecosystem could work to our benefit. Because you already have these temples, you already have a way of life which is happening. All that you need to do is target economic policies towards some of these elements, which can expand the economies of scale and boost this economic activity. And look, this is not going to transform what we do in the economy as core. For example, manufacturing for say trade
Hmm.
and all these standard things that we do in the economy. But if you want to grow by say that additional 1-2%, this entire informal economy has to also evolve. And this entire decentralized economy which we're talking about also has to evolve. So I think it would be wise for
Hmm.
policymakers to sort of understand this and try to target some of these things so that they can expand the economies of scale and look at other avenues of growing the economy.
So, Sriramji, what we can, in a nutshell, we can say is the government of India is doing two things. They are keeping a tap on the thermoeconomics, which has driven us or our civilization over millennia of years. And what they are doing also is keeping a tap on the modern economics, the way of doing business or running a country, and blending these two. And that is why we can see a change of the success or the progress being made in the country on a faster note. So the way forward is keeping an eye on our dharma economics. So this is the way of taking the country forward, and it's a success formula. Like you mentioned in the opening comment, Mahakumbh is a live example. Just 45 days, and you're generating income or GDP 10% of the whole state. तो पूरा साल काम करने के बाद they're working whole year, and they have this Mahakumbh is only 45 days. So there's a astha which is there, but there is economics also there, and there are going to be case studies developed, written by all the academics. They are there, they are watching it live, what is going on. And the kind of videos I've seen, they're mind-blowing. And they are definitely going to take all these memories, write it down, and it is going to be there for centuries in the future also. People are going to read it. This is something which happened at a very, very large, vast scale, and the world is stunned. This is what thermoeconomics is all about. And I've seen your book also. I'll give a link to your books, which all you have written, so that people can go, they can read, they can take advantage of all the things you've written. You've done a lot of research for the last 10, 12 years, as you explained me. And thank you so much for being today. If there any closing comment you have?
Yeah, just to add to what you said, these are all estimates of what we're getting in terms of revenue. But even if assuming the estimates are even say 5% of GDP, right? That itself is a huge number, right? So what I'm trying to say is, irrespective of what we're seeing here is this way of life that we are talking about is going on an autopilot on its own because of thousands of years of experience. But this produces economic outcomes. How do we sort of utilize this to expand the economic pie in a sustainable and inclusive manner? So I think that is sort of the moot argument. And of course, my books, one of the things that I try to showcase is that this dharma-based economic frameworks were there for thousands of years. In my previous book, I talk about in Kautilya's Arthashastra, and then make references to how that that provide. I mean, then I provide this framework called Dharmic capitalism, based on the idea of dharma, and how inclusive, sustainable, and wealth creation was promoted. Similarly, in this new book, which is again here, Dharmonomics, which is um, I take it to the common era kingdoms, the Cholas, Pallavas, Pandyas, Kambujidesa, and Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Champa, in Southeast Asian kingdoms, and also in China and Japan, which are some extent, I don't mention them directly, but indirectly I mentioned, where there are various
Mhm.
iterations of this. One is the Kautilyan Dharmic capitalism, another is this construct of Dharmic ecosystem, not just the temple, but the economic ecosystem the temple-based economies create. And then the Srini Dharma, the corporate guilds, which were there for again thousands of years based on the principles of Dharma. So, what I'm trying to say is our ancient progress was not some isolated entity, it's not some random entity that happened. There was a system behind it, there was a framework behind it, socio-economic framework. And the beauty is a lot of these are what an extension of our way of life today, where similarly we make certain economic choices. So it's important to understand this. By no means I'm saying that this is the formula for greatness. No. I am trying to say that look, we already have a pathway towards being a superpower, which say the Western countries have followed. Okay, great. We use whatever that is available from the 150 years of knowledge that the West has created and use it to our benefit. But also understand, look, we are not in isolation. There's an entire we are coming from a civilization which is thousands of years old. So that civilization has certain ideas, certain ethos, which are inbuilt into our economic choices. So how do we take these values from the West and customize it to our ethos, and then create a unique mix which will drive us forward as a superpower? I think that's the approach one needs to take. And thank you again for the opportunity. It's great talking to you, Sumeet ji, and your podcast is again very impressive. And of course, readers, please buy the book and read and review it in Amazon. It's available on Padega India as well. And I've done a lot of these podcasts, ANI and a few others. So, besides Sumeet ji, so look forward to engaging with all of you. And thanks once again for the opportunity.
Shriram ji, thank you so much. It was very enlightening, and I love intellectual talks. And you really took the whole conversation very deep, very nice, very systematic. And thank you for your time. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Sure. Yeah, namaste.